I overheard my son-in-law tell my daughter, "Your mother's house is worth at least 2 million, we should sell it." They didn't know I was listening. I stayed quiet. The next day they showed up with a realtor. But when they opened the door, they screamed because what they saw inside changed everything. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax, let's begin. The house was quiet that afternoon, the sort of quiet that hums with the memory of sound. I was in the kitchen, trimming the stems of sunflowers I'd bought from the market. The late sun came in through the window over the sink, warm on my hands. I heard the front door open, not with the usual cheerful call, but with the hushed, careful click of someone trying to be quiet. It was my daughter, Chloe, and David, her husband. I smiled, about to call out a welcome, but I stopped. Their voices were low, urgent, a current of tension running underneath the words. They were in the hallway, just around the corner from the kitchen doorway. I did not move. I simply stood there, the cool water from the vase still on my fingertips. "Just keep her calm and agreeable," David was saying, his voice the smooth, practiced tone he used for business calls. "The key is to make it seem like her idea, like it's for her own good." "I know, David, she loves this house." That was Chloe. Her voice held a thin note of resistance, but it was brittle. "She's sitting on a gold mine, Chloe, a liability she has to maintain all by herself. We're offering her a solution, freedom, a nice, modern condo with no stairs closer to us." He said it as if reading from a brochure. "Your mother's house is worth at least 2 million in this market, probably more. We get it listed quietly, we handle the offers, and she walks away with a nest egg that can set her up for life. And it helps us. It's a win-win." The words were clear, each one a distinct, cold stone dropped into the stillness of my home. 2 million, liability, handle the offers. I felt the air leave my lungs, not in a gasp, but in a slow, quiet seep. My hand found the edge of the countertop. The familiar, worn granite was solid under my palm. "What if she says no?" Chloe asked. "She won't," David replied, confidence like steel. "We'll present it right. We'll have Jenkins, the realtor, come by for a friendly appraisal. We'll frame it as us looking out for her future. She trusts you. Use that." There was a pause. I could imagine Chloe chewing her lip, a habit from childhood. "Okay," she said, the words small and final. "Okay, but we have to be gentle." "Of course, we're gentle. We're family." David's tone was dismissive, already moving on. "I'll call Jenkins tomorrow. We'll come by for dinner this weekend and start the conversation." I heard the jingle of keys as he dropped them into the ceramic bowl on the hall table. My bowl, from my trip to Savannah 20 years ago. Then their footsteps moved toward the living room, their voices shifting, lifting, becoming the performance of normalcy. "Mom, you home?" I looked down at the sunflowers. Their bright, open faces seemed suddenly garish. I took a breath, a deep, silent one that filled the hollow ache in my chest. I picked up the vase and walked out of the kitchen. They were standing in the living room. Chloe offered a tense smile. David's grin was wide, easy. "Ellie, there you are. Smells good in here." "Just putting some flowers in the sun," I said. My own voice sounded normal to my ears, perhaps a degree too calm. "I didn't hear you come in." "We didn't want to disturb you," Chloe said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. Her perfume was expensive, unfamiliar. "How was your day?" I asked, turning to place the vase on the dining table. I needed to move to do something ordinary. "Busy, good," David said, his eyes scanning the room. I saw him then, not as my son-in-law, but as an appraiser. His gaze flicked over the built-in bookshelves laden with my late husband's history books and my own novels, over the family photos in their mismatched frames, over the vibrant quilt draped over the back of the armchair, the one my grandmother made. He did not see a home. He saw square footage, original hardwood floors, outdated light fixtures. He saw $2 million. We made polite conversation. I asked about work. He spoke of deals and projections. Chloe talked about a new restaurant. I nodded and smiled. All the while, the words echoed in the silent chamber of my mind. Handle her. A liability, at least 2 million. I excused myself to check on a pot of stew. In the kitchen, I stared at the simmering pot, the steam clouding the window. The pain was a physical thing, a heavy, cold weight behind my ribs. It was not just the greed, it was the conspiracy. The planning in hushed tones in the hallway of the home I had shared with my husband, where we had raised our daughter. The assumption that I was a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. That my love for this house was a sentimental obstacle to their financial progress. The hurt was immense, but it was a clean hurt. It did not shatter me. It crystallized something. As I stood there, the smell of herbs and memories around me, I felt a shift. The warmth of betrayal cooled into something hard and precise. They thought they were handling me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I finished the dinner. We ate at the dining table under the warm glow of the pendant light my husband had installed. I listened to them talk. I watched Chloe avoid my eyes. I saw David's eager glances around the room, no longer bothering to hide his calculations. I played my part, the gracious, slightly weary mother, happy for the company. After they left with promises to see me on the weekend, I locked the door. I turned off the downstairs lights, one by one. The house settled back into its quiet, but it was a different quiet now. It was the quiet before a storm. I walked upstairs to my bedroom. I did not turn on the main light. The street lamp outside cast a soft glow through the lace curtains. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I'd shared with Robert for 35 years. On the nightstand was a photograph of us, taken in the backyard. He was laughing, his arm around me, the oak tree he'd planted as a sapling a young green blur behind us. I picked up the frame. My thumb traced the glass over his smiling face. "You hear that, Robert?" I whispered to the quiet room. "They think our home is just a check waiting to be cashed." I looked from his face to my reflection in the darkened window. An older black woman with silver-gray hair looked back, her expression calm, her eyes steady. The initial sting was gone. In its place was a cold, clear focus. David had a plan. It was a simple, greedy plan. I would need a better one, a smarter one. One that protected what was mine, not just the wood and brick, but the legacy in every floorboard, the memory in every painted wall. I placed the photo back on the nightstand with care. I lay down, but I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar creaks of the house, the old oak tree brushing a branch against the eaves. In the darkness, I began to think. I thought about deeds. I thought about promises. I thought about the true meaning of value. And by the time the first gray light of dawn touched the window, the outline of my response was there, firm and clear. The game was on, and they did not even know they were playing. The morning light did not bring uncertainty. It brought clarity. I rose with the same quiet resolve that had kept me company through the night. I performed my morning rituals with deliberate calm, making tea, watering the kitchen window herbs, straightening the quilt on the living room chair. Each action was a reaffirmation. This was my space, my domain. They were coming to appraise it, but I was the one who would set the true value. They arrived just past 10 o'clock. I saw the car pull up from the front window. David was driving, Chloe in the passenger seat. In the back was an older black gentleman in a crisp suit, Mr. Jenkins. I watched them for a moment. David was speaking animatedly, pointing toward the house. Chloe was nodding, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I turned away from the window and walked to the front door, arranging my face into a pleasant, slightly curious expression. I opened the door before they could knock. "Well, this is a lovely surprise," I said, my voice warm. "Mom, hi." Chloe stepped forward, her kiss landing on air near my cheek. "We were just in the neighborhood, running some errands, and we ran into Mr. Jenkins here. You remember I mentioned him, the realtor." David ushered the man forward. "Ellie, this is Charles Jenkins. Charlie, this is my mother-in-law, Alina Williams." Mr. Jenkins extended a hand. His grip was firm, his eyes a sharp, observant brown that took in my face, not just the doorframe behind me. "A pleasure, Mrs. Williams. Your daughter speaks very highly of you." "Please call me Ellie. Come in, all of you. I just put the kettle on." I stepped back, welcoming them into the hallway. I watched their feet cross the threshold. David's eyes were already scanning, calculating. Chloe's smile was strained. "We don't want to intrude," David said, the lie smooth as glass. "But since we were here and Charlie was with us, we thought it might be a fun exercise. Get a professional's opinion on the old homestead. You know, for curiosity's sake." He chuckled, a hollow sound. "Could be worth more than you think." I led them into the living room. How interesting. I've never really thought about it in those terms, it's just home. That's exactly why it's good to get an objective view, David said, his tone jovial, patronizing. Sentiment doesn't pay the property taxes, right, Charlie? Mr. Jenkins offered a small, noncommittal smile. A home is certainly more than just numbers. I gestured for them to sit. I'll get the tea. In the kitchen, I listened. Their voices were low, but the house carried them. Solid bones, David, Mr. Jenkins was saying. Original hardwood looks to be in fine condition. Crown molding in here is a nice period detail. But the kitchen is definitely original, David replied, a note of criticism in his voice. And the bathroom upstairs. That's a lot of work for a new buyer. They'd have to factor in renovation costs. I carried the tray in. Mr. Jenkins had not sat. He was standing by the bookshelf, looking at a photograph of Robert and me at my retirement party from the library. He turned as I entered. You were a librarian, Mrs. Williams. For 32 years, I said, pouring the tea. At the branch on Carver Avenue. He gave a slow nod. I know it. My sister used to take her boys there for story hour, a fine institution. David shifted impatiently. Maybe we should do a quick walkthrough, Charlie. Give you the full layout. The tour was an exercise in contrasts. David led it, with Chloe trailing silently behind. I played the gracious, slightly oblivious hostess. This is the master bedroom, David said, opening the door to my room. Good size, but the en suite is, well, you see. He gestured toward the small, pink-tiled bathroom. Mr. Jenkins walked in, but his gaze went to the wall of family photos, to the stack of books on my nightstand, to the sunlight falling across the woven rug my mother had made. Very peaceful, he remarked. David moved on to the second bedroom, my sewing room. This could be a nursery or a home office for a buyer, he said, opening a closet. It's my quilting room, I said, my voice even. I stepped past him and ran a hand over the large wooden table where my current project lay, a complex pattern of blues and silvers. My grandmother taught me. This was Chloe's room when she was a girl. Chloe, standing in the doorway, looked at the floor. The third bedroom, Robert's old study, was lined with books and his framed diplomas. David sighed quietly, as if faced with a storage problem. Mr. Jenkins walked to the bookshelf. Historian. He was, I said. He taught at the community college. Back downstairs, David pointed out the lack of an open floor plan, the wasted space of the formal dining room. Mr. Jenkins, however, paused in the dining room, his eyes on the built-in china cabinet, its glass doors reflecting the old silver. This is beautiful craftsmanship. You don't see this anymore. Finally, we ended up in the backyard. The oak tree Robert planted dominated the space, its branches wide and green. The flower beds were neat, bursting with late summer blooms. The lot is a good size, David conceded. Big enough for an extension or a pool, that adds value. Mr. Jenkins looked up at the tree. How long has this been here? My husband planted it the year Chloe was born, I said. It was a sapling. He said trees grow with children. A heavy silence followed. Chloe turned and walked back toward the house. Inside, David was all business again. So Charlie off the cuff, a ballpark. Mr. Jenkins took a final sip of his tea, now cold. He set the cup down carefully. It's difficult to say without running comps and a full analysis. The market is very active in this area. There is definite value here. He chose his words with a professional neutrality, but his eyes met mine for a brief moment. There was no greed in them. There was, I thought, a hint of understanding. But $2 million, in the ballpark, David pressed. It's not impossible, Mr. Jenkins said, his tone careful. Depending on the buyer's vision. David's smile was triumphant. He looked at me as if he had just presented me with a winning lottery ticket. See, Ellie, life-changing money. I smiled back, a soft, vague smile. It's certainly a lot to think about. Thank you for your time, Mr. Jenkins. It was very educational. They left soon after. Chloe hugged me tightly, a desperate, clinging hug. We just want what's best for you, Mom, she whispered into my shoulder. I know, baby, I whispered back, my voice soothing. The lie came easily now. I stood at the door, waving as their car pulled away. Mr. Jenkins gave a small wave back through the rear window. I closed the door and leaned against it. The performance was over. The house was quiet again, but it felt different. It felt like a stage that had just been scouted. I walked to the living room and picked up Mr. Jenkins' teacup. His lipstick was on the rim, a faint, polite smudge. He had not dismissed the house. He had seen it. I carried the cup to the sink. I washed it slowly, watching the water rinse away the last physical trace of the visit. My mind was already working, sorting the data from the encounter. David's transparent avarice, Chloe's brittle guilt, and Mr. Jenkins a professional but not an unfeeling one. He was a potential variable, a piece that could be moved. I dried the cup and put it back in the cabinet. Then I went to the small desk in the corner of the living room where the old rotary phone sat. I opened the drawer and took out the local business directory. I found the listing, Jenkins and Sons Realty Asterisk. The address was on the other side of the neighborhood, a place that had resisted the new condos. I did not call then. Timing was important. Let David believe his plan was in motion. Let them sit with their anticipation for a day. I needed them confident. I needed them to think I was a leaf floating on the current of their design. But I was not a leaf. I was the stone in the riverbed, and the water was about to change course. My next move required a private conversation, and I knew just how to arrange it. I waited until the next afternoon. The delay was strategic. It allowed David's imagined victory to solidify in his mind. It gave Chloe time to sit with her unease, and it gave me time to prepare. I spent the morning in the garden, pulling weeds with a methodical focus. The physical work cleared my head, the simple satisfaction of uprooting something unwanted mirroring my own intentions. After lunch, I went to my bedroom. In the back of my closet, behind a panel of shoe boxes I never used, was the small wall safe Robert had installed years ago. I dialed the combination, Chloe's birthday, a choice that now felt like irony. The door swung open with a soft click. Inside were the documents of a life lived. Passports, birth certificates, our marriage license, and at the front 2 folders. The first held the deed to the house. I pulled it out. The paper was stiff, the typed lines formal and permanent. It listed only one name, Eleanor Marie Williams, sole owner. Robert had insisted on it when we paid off the mortgage with his life insurance. "This is yours, Ellie," he'd said. "Always yours, a foundation no one can shake." I had seen it as a morbid formality then. Now, it was my first line of defense. The second folder held the life insurance policy and the bank statements that showed the proceeds, carefully invested over the years. The money had provided my retirement cushion, paid for repairs, allowed me to live comfortably without touching the principal. David and Chloe knew I was secure, but they did not know the details. They assumed an elderly woman's finances were simple, perhaps precarious. They did not account for Robert's meticulous planning or for my own careful stewardship. I took both folders to the kitchen table. I did not need to read them. I needed to see them, to touch the physical evidence of my security and my ownership. They were paper walls, yes, but they were formidable ones. Then I went to the phone. I dialed the number for Jenkins and Sons Realty. A woman's voice answered, bright and professional. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Charles Jenkins, please. Tell him it's Eleanor Williams calling. He visited my home yesterday." There was a brief hold. Then his voice came on the line, calm and polite. "Mrs. Williams, this is a surprise. How can I help you?" "I hope I'm not interrupting your day, Mr. Jenkins." "Not at all." "I was thinking about our conversation yesterday," I began, my tone measured, friendly. "You mentioned knowing the old library branch. It got me thinking about how much this neighborhood has changed, the history that's getting paved over." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear him shifting from professional courtesy to genuine interest. "It certainly has. I've sold houses here for 50 years. The stories in these walls." "That's exactly what I was thinking about," I said. "The stories. I wondered if you might have time to stop by again. Not for an appraisal, for a conversation. I'd value the perspective of someone who remembers what this street used to be." The request was deliberately vague, framed as nostalgia. It was an appeal not to the realtor, but to the man who had noticed the photographs and the oak tree. Another pause, longer this time. "I understand," he said finally. His voice held a new note of caution, of reassessment. "I have some time tomorrow morning. Would that be suitable?" "That would be perfect. I'll have coffee ready. And please come alone. My daughter and son-in-law mean well, but sometimes history is best discussed without a modern audience." The silence that followed was profound. I had drawn a line. I had alluded to the subtext of his previous visit. I was asking him to choose a side under the guise of a friendly chat. "I see," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice dropping into a lower, more serious register. "Tomorrow morning, then, around 10. I'll be expecting you." I hung up the phone. The receiver was cool in my hand. I had cast the first stone. The invitation was a test. If he came, it meant he was curious or decent, or perhaps saw something in the situation that troubled him. If he declined or warned David, I would know he was simply another tool in their plan. But I had judged his character correctly in our brief meeting. A man who appreciated crown molding and asked about a tree was not a man without sentiment. I returned the documents to the safe, spinning the dial to lock them away. The action felt significant. I was securing my past to protect my future. That evening the phone rang. It was Chloe. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. How are you feeling after yesterday? It was a lot, I know." Her voice was tinged with a nervous energy. She was probing, trying to gauge my reaction. "I'm fine, dear. It was very interesting," I said, keeping my tone light. "Mr. Jenkins seemed like a nice man." "He is very knowledgeable. David's already been talking to him about next steps." She rushed ahead, then caught herself. "I mean, if you decide you're interested, of course." "There's certainly a lot to consider," I said, the non-answer perfected over a lifetime of dealing with patronizing salesmen and bureaucrats. "Don't you worry about me. I'm thinking things through." "Okay, Mom." She sounded relieved, mistaking my calm for passivity. "We just want you to be happy." "I know you do." After we said goodbye, I stood by the phone for a moment. The pieces were now in motion. I had secured my legal proof. I had initiated contact with a possible ally. The next phase required not documents or phone calls, but a different kind of persuasion. It required making someone understand that this house was not a collection of outdated fixtures on a valuable lot. It was a living record. Tomorrow, I would begin to tell that story. My counteroffensive would not be fought with shouts or accusations. It would be waged with memory, with legacy, with the quiet, undeniable weight of a life lived in one place. And it would start with a cup of coffee and a man who remembered the way things were. Mr. Jenkins arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. I saw his car, a clean, older sedan, park at the curb. He emerged alone, carrying a simple briefcase. He was dressed more casually than before, in slacks and a pressed polo shirt. It was a subtle signal. This was not an official business call. I met him at the door. "Mr. Jenkins, thank you for coming." "Ellie, please, and thank you for the invitation." He stepped inside, his eyes doing another slow circuit of the hallway, but this time with the air of a visitor, not a prospector. I led him to the living room. The coffee was already prepared on the low table between the sofas. I had also set out a plate of shortbread cookies, the kind my mother always served to guests. The quilt from the armchair was now spread across the back of the sofa, its intricate pattern of blues, greens, and golds fully visible. "Please have a seat," I said, pouring the coffee. "Cream or sugar?" "Black is fine," he said, settling into the armchair. He nodded toward the quilt. "That is remarkable work, family heirloom." "In a way," I said, handing him his cup. I sat on the sofa, facing him. "My grandmother pieced the top. My mother did the backing, and I did the actual quilting, the stitching that holds it all together. It took 3 generations to finish. Every stitch tells a part of our story." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracing the patterns. "You don't see that kind of patience anymore." "No," I agreed. I took a sip of my coffee. "You said you've been in this neighborhood 50 years. 52 come spring. My father started the agency. I took it over." He smiled briefly. "I've seen every kind of transaction. The happy ones, the sad ones, the greedy ones. I let the comment hang in the air for a moment. I imagine you have. This house, we bought it in 1978. Robert and I were newlyweds. It was a stretch. But this was the street where the teachers, the postal workers, the small business owners lived. People who believed in building something. I remember, Mr. Jenkins said. The Carlyles lived 2 doors down. He was a mechanic. She taught piano. Mrs. Carlyle taught Chloe her scales right at that upright piano, I said, pointing to the corner where the instrument still stood, now mostly covered in photographs. We traded. Robert tutored their son in history. She gave Chloe lessons. He nodded, a genuine warmth in his expression. Barter system. That's how communities thrive. That's exactly right. I put my cup down. Come, let me show you something that doesn't appear on any floor plan. I stood and led him to the back window. The oak tree stood majestic in the morning light. Robert planted that the year Chloe was born. He said a girl should have a tree to grow up with, something with deep roots. We had a picnic under it every year on her birthday, even after she was grown and thought it was silly. He's buried under that tree. Mr. Jenkins was quiet. I didn't realize. His ashes, I clarified, my voice steady. It's what he wanted, to become part of the roots. So you see, that tree isn't landscaping. It's a memorial. It's part of the foundation. We returned to our seats. I had planned these revelations, but speaking them aloud grounded them in reality, fortified my own resolve. The house itself, I continued. This living room, it was a community meeting space in the 90s. We organized neighborhood watch programs here. We planned the petition to save the original library branch from closing. We didn't succeed, but we tried. The echoes of those conversations are in these walls. Mr. Jenkins watched me, his professional detachment gone, replaced by a focused attentiveness. You're telling me the history of an asset. No, I said, meeting his gaze directly. I'm telling you the history of a home. An asset is passive. It just is asterisk. A home is active. It does asterisk. It shelters, it nurtures, it remembers. My daughter and her husband see the first. They came to you to put a price on the lumber and the land. They want to convert an active heart into a passive number in a bank account. There, it was said. The pretense of a simple historical chat was over. Mr. Jenkins did not look surprised. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. They are very eager. Your son-in-law has called my office twice since our visit. He is pushing for a quick, exclusive listing. I am sure he is. I kept my hands folded in my lap. But the deed is in my name, only my name. The decision is mine, and I have no intention of selling. He absorbed this. Then what is your intention, Ellie? Why am I here? You are here because I need a professional who understands the difference between a house and a home. I have a plan. It does not involve a for sale sign. It involves a different kind of legacy. I reached for a folder I had placed on the side table. It was not the one from the safe. This one contained my own typed notes, sketches, ideas. I want to create a trust. Upon my passing, this house will become a community historical and arts center. A place for local history exhibits, quilt-making workshops, a reading room. The backyard with that oak tree will become a community garden, managed by the neighborhood association. I will retain a life estate. I will live here until I die. After that, it belongs to the community that helped build it. I opened the folder and showed him my rudimentary plans. They were not legal documents, but a vision, drawn in clear lines and notes. Mr. Jenkins took the folder. He looked at the pages, not quickly, but with careful consideration. He spent a long time looking at my sketch of the backyard garden with the oak tree at its center. Finally, he closed the folder. This is a noble plan, he said, but it is complex. It requires lawyers, zoning considerations, trust administration. It is the opposite of a quick sale. I understand that. I am prepared for complexity. What I need to know is this. When the time comes, would you be willing to help facilitate this? Not as a salesman, but as an advisor. Someone who can ensure the transition honors the history of the place. There would be a professional fee, of course. He was silent for a full minute, looking around the room at the photographs, the books, the quilt. He was weighing his professional relationship with David against what he was being asked to do. "Your son-in-law will not be pleased," he said finally. "I am aware." He let out a slow breath. "I have spent 50 years watching families make choices about property. Some choices build people up. Some choices tear them apart. What your family is attempting, it lacks respect." He met my eyes. "Yes, Ellie, I will help you, not for a fee, because it's the right thing to do for this house and for you." The alliance was sealed. It was not a dramatic moment. It was a quiet agreement between two people who understood value beyond a price per square foot. We spent the next hour discussing practical next steps, the name of a good estate lawyer, the process for a historical designation, how to structure the trust. He left with a firm handshake and a promise of discretion. I stood at the window after his car drove away. The first phase was complete. I had secured my legal footing, and now I had a guide through the procedural maze. The next step was to turn my vision into an unassailable legal reality. I needed to build paper walls so high and so thick that no amount of greed could break them down. I picked up the phone book again. It was time to call a lawyer. The name of the lawyer was Marcus Thorne. Mr. Jenkins had provided the contact, with a note that Marcus was the grandson of one of my late husband's colleagues at the community college. The connection was thin but significant. It meant he was from here. He understood the neighborhood's fabric. I called his office and scheduled an appointment for the following day. I did not explain the details over the phone, only that I needed to discuss estate planning and property rights. His office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel. The reception area was cool and quiet, with abstract art on the walls and thick carpet that muffled sound. It was a world away from my living room with its quilt and photographs. A young assistant led me to a conference room. Marcus Thorne stood up as I entered. He was in his late 30s, dressed in a well-cut but understated suit. His handshake was firm, his expression alert and kind. "Mrs. Williams, it's an honor. My grandfather, Arthur Bailey, spoke very highly of your husband." "Arthur was a good man," I said, taking the seat he offered. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice." "Of course, Mr. Jenkins mentioned you had some urgent matters to discuss regarding your home." He sat across from me, a legal pad and pen ready. "How can I help?" I began clearly, without drama. I told him my daughter and son-in-law were under the impression I should sell my house. I told him they had brought a realtor for an appraisal without my full understanding. I did not mention overhearing their conversation. I presented it as a difference of opinion that had made me realize I needed to formalize my wishes. "I need to understand my legal position first," I said. "The house is in my name only. The deed is here." I slid the copy from my bag across the polished table. He examined it, nodding. "This is clear. Sole ownership. They have no legal claim or right to force a sale or to sell it on your behalf, unless you were deemed mentally incompetent, which requires a court order. The decision is entirely yours. Do you have any reason to believe they might pursue that angle?" I considered the question. David was arrogant, but I did not think he was foolish enough to attempt a competency challenge. It was messy, public, and he had no grounds. "No, they are relying on persuasion and on my assumed ignorance." Marcus made a note. "Good. So legally, you are the absolute authority. What is it you wish to do?" I laid out my plan. The community trust. The life estate. The intention to explore a local historical or cultural designation for the property. I spoke in the same measured tones I had used with Mr. Jenkins, but here the language needed to be precise. He listened without interruption, his pen moving quickly. When I finished, he leaned back. "This is a comprehensive plan, and a commendable one. Let's break down the mechanics." For the next hour, he educated me. He explained the creation of a revocable living trust, into which I would transfer the title of the house. I would be the trustee during my lifetime. Upon my death, a successor trustee, he suggested a local community foundation in conjunction with Mr. Jenkins would take over, and the terms of the trust would dictate the property's use as a cultural center. "A life estate is already part of this, as you'll retain full use," he said. "But the trust is cleaner. It avoids probate. It is a private document, and it is very difficult to challenge if drafted properly." I want it to be ironclad, I said. It will be. We will also draft a new will to complement it, leaving any remaining assets to your daughter, but explicitly reaffirming the trust terms for the house. This creates a consistent legal narrative. He tapped his pen. Regarding the historical designation, that is a separate process with the city's Cultural Heritage Board. It can restrict alterations to the property and could affect market value, but given your plan, that's irrelevant. It would, however, add another layer of protection. A designated property is harder to repurpose. I want that layer, I said. He nodded. I can put you in touch with the head of the Heritage Board. She's a friend. I believe she would be very supportive of your vision. Then he looked at me, his professional demeanor softening slightly. Mrs. Williams, if I may, this plan effectively disinherits your daughter from a significant monetary asset. It redirects that wealth into the community. She may contest the trust after your passing, alleging undue influence or a lack of capacity. I met his gaze. I am of sound mind. I am making this choice with full awareness, and she is not being disinherited. She is being given a different inheritance, one of principle, one that honors her father's memory and the community she came from. If she chooses to see only the lost cash, that is her failure, not mine. He held my look for a moment, then gave a slow, respectful nod. Understood. We will document your capacity thoroughly. A letter from your physician, contemporaneous notes of our meetings. We will build a fortress. We scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next week to review the draft documents. He told me the costs, which were substantial but within my means. I wrote a retainer check without hesitation. It was not an expense, it was an investment in permanence. Leaving his office, the afternoon sun felt different. The legal language, the procedures, the costs, they were not obstacles, they were tools. For the first time since I'd stood in my kitchen listening to David's plans, I felt a sense of expansive power. Their plan was built on lies and manipulation. Mine was being built on law, on clarity, on documented intent. Theirs was flimsy. Mine would be monumental. When I returned home, the house welcomed me with its familiar silence. I went to my desk and took out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote, guest list ***. I needed an audience for the final act. Under Mr. Jenkins' name, I wrote Marcus Thorne-esque. Then I wrote Claudia Rice, Heritage Board. I added Maya Phelps, Community Garden Project. I had met Maya at the farmer's market. She had long wanted a neighborhood garden space. I picked up the phone and called the number Marcus had given me for Claudia Rice. A woman with a brisk, scholarly voice answered. I introduced myself and explained my interest in the historical designation process for my home, briefly outlining its history and my ultimate vision. That sounds like exactly the kind of legacy preservation we try to encourage, she said, her interest immediate. I'd love to see the property and hear more. I'm having a small gathering next week to discuss the future of the house, I said. I would be honored if you could attend. It would be informative to have your perspective. She agreed without hesitation. I called Maya Phelps next and extended a similar invitation, framing it as a discussion about potential community use of the backyard. She was equally enthusiastic. The trap was no longer an idea. It had dimensions, a time, a place, and a guest list. All that remained was to bait it. I needed to make the one call I had been waiting to make. I needed to summon the players who thought they were directing the game. I looked at the clock. It was too late in the day. It would be better to call tomorrow to let the anticipation build a little more within me. Every step was now a deliberate choice. I was no longer reacting. I was architecting. The following morning, after a night of calm, precise thought, I made the call. I chose 11 o'clock. It was late enough to seem like a considered decision, early enough to catch them before the busyness of their day set in. I sat at the kitchen table, the silver picture frame that held a photo of Robert and young Chloe facing me. My reflection in the glass was a ghost over their smiling faces. I dialed Chloe's number. She answered on the third ring. Mom, is everything okay? Everything's fine, dear. Better than fine. I infused my voice with a light, almost girlish energy I hadn't used in years. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the house. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her signaling to David. Oh. You and David were right, I said, the words deliberate and clear. I've been clinging to the past. This big old house is too much for me. All those memories, they're heavy. Maybe it is time for a fresh start, something smaller, easier, closer to you. The silence on the other end was profound. Then, a muffled sound, a hand over the receiver, and a distant, excited exclamation from David. Chloe came back on, her voice higher, strained with shocked relief. "Mom, that's wonderful. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said, my tone firm with fake conviction. "You've been looking out for me. I see that now. I want to do this, and I want to do it right." "Of course, David will be thrilled. We'll help you with everything." The words tumbled out. "We can start packing, we can." "Not so fast," I interjected gently, a soft laugh in my voice. "I have a condition, one little thing." "Anything." "This house has been my home for over 40 years. I can't just hand it over to a stranger through a stack of papers. I want a proper send-off, a recognition of what it's been." I paused, letting the idea settle. "I'd like to have a small gathering here, a final valuation presentation, but done properly. I want Mr. Jenkins to present his full appraisal to us officially. And I've been talking to a few people in the neighborhood, old friends who care about these old houses. I'd like them there too, to witness, to say goodbye. It would make me feel better about the whole thing, like I'm closing a chapter with some dignity." I could almost hear the gears turning, the quick, whispered consultation. David's voice, a low rumble in the background, was undoubtedly saying yes, yes, whatever she wants. Chloe returned, her voice smoother now, embracing the script. "That's a beautiful idea, Mom. Really, of course, we'll be there. When?" "How about next Thursday evening? 6 o'clock. I'll make some light refreshments. You bring Mr. Jenkins. I'll invite a few of my friends from the Historical Society and the Garden Club. We'll make it a proper occasion." "Thursday, 6 o'clock, we'll be there." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm so glad you're seeing it this way." "I am too, honey. It feels like a weight lifting." The lie was so complete it felt like truth. "I'll see you then." I hung up and placed the phone back in its cradle. My hand was steady. In the reflection of the silver frame, my face was serene, but my eyes were sharp. The hook was set. The next few days were a study in dual realities. I moved through my normal routines, grocery shopping, library visits, quilting. But beneath the surface, every action was part of the preparation. I cleaned the house not for buyers, but for a stage. I baked cookies and prepared small savory tarts, the ordinary hostess tasks that would sell the illusion of a benign gathering. I called Mr. Jenkins to confirm his attendance. "They took the bait," I said simply. "I expected they would," he replied. "I received a very enthusiastic call from your son-in-law confirming my presentation. He seems to think I'll be bringing offer papers." "Let him think it." "I will. I've prepared a generic market analysis. It will serve as a plausible prop." His voice was dry. "I assume the other guests have been notified." "They have. They're coming under the impression it's a planning meeting for the community trust. They have no idea about the family drama. They're just supportive of the concept." A clean separation of audiences. Wise. The final call was to Marcus Thorne, the lawyer. "The meeting is set for Thursday at 6, I told him. "I would like you to be present. Your role will be to confirm the legal standing of the documents when the time comes." "Understood. I'll bring executed copies of the trust agreement and the new will, along with the capacity letter from your doctor. I'll present them as a asterisk fait accompli asterisk." "Perfect." On Wednesday, the day before, a courier delivered a large envelope from Marcus's office. Inside were the finished documents. The trust agreement was dozens of pages thick, bound with a heavy staple. I flipped to the signature page. My name was typed neatly above the line. I read the core clause aloud to the empty living room. "Upon the death of the grantor and life tenant, Eleanor Marie Williams, the trustee shall transfer title and all rights to the described property to the Williams Legacy Trust, to be used in perpetuity as a community historical and cultural center." The words were dense, legal, and beautiful in their finality. I signed each copy with my best pen, the ink dark and sure. I notarized them at the bank that afternoon. The process was bureaucratic, mundane. No one in the quiet bank office knew they were witnessing the fortification of a castle. That night I did not sleep much, but it was not anxiety that kept me awake. It was the quiet hum of anticipation, the calm focus of a chess player who has seen the endgame many moves in advance. I reviewed my mental checklist. The guests were confirmed. The documents were signed. The story was prepared. The house was ready. I thought about Chloe's voice on the phone, that fragile hope. I thought about David's hidden glee. They believed they had won me over. They believed my sentimentality had finally bent to their logic. They believed they were walking into a celebration of their own cleverness. They were wrong. They were walking into a courtroom of my making. The judge was memory. The jury was community. The sentence was permanent, and I was ready to deliver the verdict. Thursday arrived with a clear sky. The afternoon light was long and golden, the kind that made the oak tree in the backyard cast deep, familiar shadows across the lawn. I spent the final hours in a state of purposeful calm. I arranged the refreshments on the dining table. I placed extra chairs in the living room, not in a circle, but in a loose semicircle facing the fireplace. I wanted a clear line of sight. Mr. Jenkins was the first to arrive, 15 minutes early. He carried a professional-looking leather portfolio. "Ellie," he said, his voice low, "everything is ready on my end." "Thank you, Charles." I used his first name deliberately, reinforcing our alliance. "Just follow my lead." He nodded and took a seat to one side of the semicircle, placing his portfolio on the floor beside him. Next was Marcus Thorne. He arrived precisely at 6, carrying a slim, expensive briefcase. He was dressed in a dark suit, the uniform of authority. "Mrs. Williams," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, his expression neutral, professional. "Marcus, please, sit anywhere." I gestured to the chairs. He chose one next to Mr. Jenkins, setting his briefcase on his knees. Almost immediately after, the doorbell rang again. It was Claudia Rice from the Heritage Board. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with glasses on a chain and an air of academic curiosity. "Mrs. Williams, what a charming home," she said, her eyes immediately going to the crown molding and the built-in bookshelves. "I can see why you're passionate about its history." "Thank you for coming, Claudia. Please, make yourself comfortable." Maya Phelps arrived just behind her. She was younger, dressed in practical gardening clothes, her hands showing the marks of soil and work. "Ellie, your backyard is even more perfect than I remembered," she said with genuine excitement. "The sunlight on that oak is magical. A community garden there would be a dream." I guided her in. The living room was now occupied by 4 people who had no connection to each other, except through me and this house. A mild, polite confusion hung in the air. Mr. Jenkins and Marcus exchanged quiet greetings. Claudia and Maya introduced themselves, each clearly wondering about the other's role. The stage was almost set. At 6:05, I heard a car door shut with a solid, expensive sound. Then another. Footsteps on the walk, brisk and confident. The door opened without a knock. Chloe still used her key. They entered the hallway, their voices bright and anticipatory. "Mom, we're here." I stepped into the hallway to meet them. They were both dressed for a business casual celebration. David wore a crisp button-down shirt without a tie, sleeves rolled with calculated ease. Chloe wore a new-looking dress, her makeup perfect. They were both smiling, but Chloe's eyes were wide, a little frantic. David's smile was one of pure, unconcealed triumph. "You're just in time," I said, my voice warm. "Everyone in the living room." David's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he registered the word everyone. He peered past me. His gaze swept over Mr. Jenkins, then moved to the 3 strangers. His brow creased. Chloe clutched her purse tighter. "Mom, I thought this was just going to be us and Mr. Jenkins," Chloe asked, her voice thin. "Oh, I invited a few other friends who are interested in the house's future," I said, my tone airy. "I wanted a well-rounded discussion. Come in, come in." I herded them into the living room. The space felt full now, charged with unspoken questions. David's eyes darted from face to face, trying to categorize. He recognized Marcus as a lawyer by his suit and briefcase. The other two women were mysteries. David, Chloe, you know Mr. Jenkins, I began. This is Marcus Thorne, my attorney. Claudia Rice from the city's Cultural Heritage Board, and Maya Phelps, who runs the Neighborhood Community Garden Initiative. Each person nodded as I introduced them. David forced a smile, a stiff, mechanical movement. A lawyer and a heritage board. He looked at me, his confusion tipping toward suspicion. For the paperwork and the historical details, I said, waving a hand as if it were the most natural thing. One must be thorough. Please sit. Can I get anyone a drink? Everyone declined. David and Chloe took the two remaining chairs, sitting close together. Chloe's posture was rigid. David kept looking at Marcus's briefcase, then at Mr. Jenkins's portfolio. An awkward silence descended. Maya fidgeted with her hands. Claudia adjusted her glasses. Mr. Jenkins gazed calmly at the quilt on the sofa. Marcus sat perfectly still, his hands folded over his briefcase. I remained standing, positioning myself near the fireplace, the focal point of the room. I looked at each of my guests in turn. My heart beat a steady, strong rhythm in my chest. This was it. The players were all assembled, just as I had orchestrated. The predator and his accomplice were in the room, but so were the witnesses, the allies, and the rulebook. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the quiet. I invited you here tonight because each of you, in your own way, has a stake in what happens to this house. I thought it was only right that we all hear the same information at the same time. David leaned forward, his eyes glued to Mr. Jenkins. Right, the appraisal. Charlie, you have the numbers. Mr. Jenkins didn't move. He looked at me, waiting. I smiled. The appraisal is important, David, but I believe we should start with context, with history, with value that exists beyond a spreadsheet. I turned my gaze to Claudia Rice. Claudia, you understand value that can't be liquidated. Tell me, what makes a home historically significant? The trap was no longer just set. The door had just swung shut. Claudia Rice adjusted her glasses, momentarily surprised to be addressed first. But she recovered quickly, leaning forward with professional interest. Significance is often found in continuity, Mrs. Williams, in a structure's ability to tell a continuous story about a community, who lived here, how they lived, what they valued. It's in original architectural details, of course, but more so in the intangible heritage, the events that happened within the walls. The ways a home served as more than just a private residence. I nodded. This house was purchased in 1978 by my husband, Robert Williams, a history teacher, and myself, a librarian. It became a hub, neighborhood watch meetings in the 70s, library advocacy groups in the 80s, a tutoring center in the 90s. The oak tree in the backyard was planted the day our daughter was born. My husband's ashes are buried beneath it. I paused, letting the facts settle. These are the intangible details, Claudia. Does that constitute significance? Claudia's eyes were bright. It absolutely does. That's precisely the narrative the Heritage Board seeks to preserve. A property doesn't need to be a century old. It needs to be a witness to the community's life. This sounds like a cornerstone property for this neighborhood's Black professional history. David shifted in his chair, the leather creaking. This is all very touching, Ellie, but I think we're getting off track. Charlie has the market analysis. That's the relevant data for our purposes. Our purposes have changed, David, I said, my voice still calm. I turned to Maya. Maya, you've seen the backyard. Could it support a community garden? Maya's face lit up. Oh, absolutely. The sunlight exposure is ideal. The soil seems rich. And that magnificent oak would be a natural centerpiece, a gathering spot. It's a perfect, peaceful space for the neighborhood. A garden requires long-term access, David interjected, his tone sharp. That would be a condition of sale for a buyer, which complicates. There is no buyer, I stated. The room went completely still. I looked at my daughter. Chloe, you and David believed I was ready to sell. You brought Mr. Jenkins here to appraise my home for a quick, profitable transaction. You thought my memories were a burden and my house was an ATM. Chloe's face paled. Mom, we thought. I know what you thought. I heard you in the hallway 2 weeks ago. Your mother's house is worth at least 2 million. We'll handle her. The words dropped into the silence like stones. David's jaw tightened. Chloe flinched as if struck. I am not a problem to be handled, I continued, my gaze sweeping over them before returning to the group. This house is not a liability. It is a legacy. And tonight, I am not here to listen to an appraisal for a sale. I am here to present the legal and historical framework that will protect that legacy in perpetuity. I nodded to Marcus Thorne. He opened his briefcase with a crisp click. He withdrew several thick, bound documents. Mrs. Williams has executed a revocable living trust, Marcus announced, his voice clear and professional, filling the room. As of this afternoon, the title to this property has been transferred into the Williams Legacy Trust. Mrs. Williams retains a life estate, meaning she has the absolute right to live here for the rest of her life. Upon her passing, the trust stipulates that the property will be transferred to a board of trustees, comprised of a representative from a community foundation, Mr. Jenkins here, and a member of the Heritage Board, for conversion into a community historical and cultural center. The backyard will be dedicated as a permanent community garden space, as discussed with Ms. Phelps. He slid copies of the signed, notarized trust agreement toward David and Chloe. David did not touch them. He stared at the documents as if they were poisonous. Additionally, Marcus continued, Mrs. Williams has a signed letter from her physician affirming her sound mental capacity. The trust is ironclad and specifically designed to withstand legal challenge. She has also instructed me to begin the application process, with Ms. Rice's assistance, for a local historical cultural designation for the property. This will add a further layer of protection against alteration or commercial redevelopment. Claudia Rice was nodding, a smile on her face. This is exceptional, a perfect use of the designation tool, preservation through active community use. Maya clasped her hands together. A garden, this is wonderful news, Ellie. Mr. Jenkins finally spoke, his voice grave. I have reviewed the market analysis David requested. The potential sale price is substantial. He opened his portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper toward David. But as Mrs. Williams' advisor on this transition, my professional opinion is that the value she has created through this trust, historical, cultural, social value, far exceeds any financial figure on that page. It is value that cannot be liquidated. It can only be gifted. David found his voice. It was low, strangled with rage. This is insane. You can't do this. This is our inheritance. It is not, I said, my voice cutting through his. It was never yours, it is mine, and I am choosing its future. You looked at my home and saw a check. I am choosing to see it as a heart, and you tried to cash in the heart. That is a failure of character, David, not a financial planning error. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Chloe, we're leaving. This is a farce. Chloe did not move. She was staring at the trust document, her eyes wide, filling with tears that were not of anger, but of dawning, horrible understanding. She looked from the legal text to my face. All the stories, she whispered, her voice breaking. The tree, the meetings you tried to tell me, and I just wanted a bigger kitchen. I looked at my daughter, and for the first time that evening, my stern expression softened, though my resolve did not waver. You are still my child. You are still in my will. You will inherit everything else, the investments, the personal items. But this house, this land, this memory, that is for the community that helped raise you. That is the inheritance I choose to leave, one of principle. David snatched the market analysis off the table, crumpling it in his fist. This isn't over. He spat the words at Marcus. We'll challenge this. Undue influence. She's clearly not in her right mind. Marcus didn't flinch. Any challenge will fail. The documentation is comprehensive. I would advise against a public, costly lawsuit that you will certainly lose. The facts are all here in this room. David looked around at the faces, Claudia's studious approval, Maya's hopeful joy, Mr. Jenkins's quiet condemnation, Marcus's legal certainty. He saw no allies, only witnesses to his defeat. With a final, furious glance at me, he turned and stormed out of the living room, his footsteps harsh in the hallway. The front door slammed shut. The sound seemed to release the tension in the room. Claudia and Maya both let out breaths they seemed to have been holding. Mr. Jenkins leaned back, a look of weary satisfaction on his face. Chloe remained seated, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She was still looking at me, her expression one of utter devastation. The presentation was over. The appraisal was complete. The true value had been stated, not in dollars, but in deeds and dreams, and she finally understood the cost. The slam of the front door echoed through the house, a period at the end of David's sentence. In the living room, the silence that followed was thick, but it was a different kind of quiet. The tension of performance was gone. What remained was the fallout. Claudia Rice cleared her throat, gathering her purse. Well, this has been quite informative, Ellie. I'll be in touch about the designation paperwork. She stood, offering a sympathetic but awkward smile. Maya Phelps followed suit, her earlier excitement tempered by the family drama she'd witnessed. I'll draft some preliminary garden layouts, she said softly, when you're ready. Mr. Jenkins and Marcus Thorne rose together. Marcus carefully returned the trust documents to his briefcase. Everything is in order, Mrs. Williams. My office will file these tomorrow. You have my card if you need anything. Mr. Jenkins gave me a slow, meaningful nod. You did what was right for your home, Ellie. Good night. I saw them to the door, thanking each of them with a calm dignity I did not have to feign. Their cars pulled away from the curb one by one, leaving Chloe's sedan alone in the fading light. I closed the door and turned back to the living room. Chloe had not moved. She sat in the same chair, her posture collapsed inward. The tear had dried on her cheek, leaving a faint track. She was staring at her hands, clenched in her lap. I did not rush to comfort her. I walked to the sofa and sat down, leaving the space of the coffee table between us. I picked up the quilt that lay between us, folding it slowly, giving her time, giving myself time. The house was utterly still. He's gone to a hotel, she said finally, her voice raw. He won't be back tonight. I expect not. She looked up then, her eyes red-rimmed and searching my face. You heard everything, that day in the hallway. I did. And you said nothing. You just planned all this. Her gesture took in the room, the now empty chairs, the invisible weight of the legal documents. What was there to say in the moment? I asked, my voice level. To confront you while you were still whispering. To have a tearful scene where you would have made excuses and David would have spun justifications. It would have changed nothing. You had already agreed with him. Your nod in that hallway was a signature. She flinched. He pressured me. He makes it all sound so logical. The numbers, the freedom for you, the help for us, it was a spreadsheet, Mom. It wasn't personal. It was the most personal thing you could have done, I replied, and for the first time, a sliver of the pain I'd contained seeped into my tone. You reduced my life, your father's life, your own childhood, to a line item. You conspired to take the one thing that is wholly mine, the sanctuary I built with him, the museum of our family, and convert it into capital for your lifestyle. You looked at every memory here and saw a defect to be renovated away. That is profoundly personal, Chloe. She began to cry in earnest then, silent tears that shook her shoulders. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I don't know how I let it happen. I do, I said, not unkindly. You married a man who sees the world as a series of transactions. You wanted the life he offered. And somewhere along the way, you started to see through his eyes. My home became an asset. I became a liability. Your love became conditional on my compliance. That's not true, she protested, but the force was gone. Isn't it? Would you be here crying if I had simply agreed to sell? Would you be mourning the loss of the oak tree? Or would you be celebrating a down payment on a vacation home? She had no answer. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, a childish gesture that reminded me of the little girl who used to climb that very tree. I am not doing this to punish you, I continued, placing the neatly folded quilt beside me. I am doing it to protect what is mine, to ensure that the legacy of this house, a legacy of community, of family, of quiet strength, is not erased for a handful of money. This house was never an ATM, it's a heart. You tried to cash in the heart, and a heart cannot be bought or sold. It can only be given, so I am giving it to the neighborhood, to history, to something bigger than greed. And what about me? The question was a whisper. You are still my daughter. I love you. That has not changed. But trust is not an automatic inheritance. It is earned. Your apology tonight is a start, but a true change, a reawakening to what matters that will take time and action. It will require you to decide what you value more, your husband's spreadsheets or your family's story. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the photographs, the piano, the shelves of books. It was as if she was seeing it for the first time in years. He'll be furious. He'll say you've stolen from us. He can say whatever he likes. The law says otherwise, and more importantly, my conscience says otherwise. I stood up. You should go home, Chloe, or to the hotel. You need to think, and you need to decide what you're going to say to him when he demands you choose a side. She stood slowly, unsteady. She didn't move toward the door immediately. Instead, she took a step toward me, hesitant. Can I come back? Just to talk. Not about the house, just to talk. I looked at her, at the genuine plea in her eyes, the first glimpse of the daughter I remembered beneath the polished surface. Yes, you can always come back. This is still your home. It will always be a home. It just won't be a bank. She nodded, a quick, jerky motion. Then she turned and walked to the hallway. I heard the soft click of the front door closing, gentler this time. Alone again, I let out a long, slow breath. The calculated energy that had sustained me for 2 weeks was draining away, leaving a deep fatigue, but also a profound stillness. The battle was over. The victory was secured. Now came the harder part, the living with the consequences, the hope for redemption, the quiet work of holding a line that had finally been drawn. I turned off the lamps, one by one, leaving the room in moonlight. The dust of the confrontation was settling, and beneath it, the foundation of my home and my life felt more solid than ever. Weeks passed. The formal shockwaves of my decision subsided into a quiet, settled reality. The historical designation application was filed, moving through the city's bureaucratic channels. The trust documents were recorded at the county office, a matter of public record that David could, and did, review with his own lawyer. He received a formal, terse letter from Marcus Thorne stating that any legal challenge would be vigorously defended and almost certainly fail. We heard nothing more from him. The true change, however, happened not in offices, but in the earth. On a bright Saturday morning, the backyard was no longer just my private sanctuary. Maya Phelps arrived with a team of volunteers from the neighborhood association. They came with gardening tools, bags of soil amendment, and trays of young plants. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, shovels cutting into dirt, and the easy chatter of people building something together. I was there not as a spectator, but as a participant. My hands, usually busy with needle and thread or the pages of a book, were buried in the rich, dark soil. I helped stake out the plots, each one designated for a different family or a different purpose. Herbs, vegetables, flowers for cutting. The oak tree, Robert's tree, stood as the presiding elder at the head of the garden, its new leaves casting dappled shade over the workers. I was patting soil around a young tomato plant when I saw a figure at the gate. It was Chloe. She was alone, dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back. She carried a small pot with a lavender plant in it. She waited, unsure, until I looked up and saw her. I stood, brushing the dirt from my knees. I walked over to the gate. The volunteers glanced our way, then politely returned to their work. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was tentative. "Hello, Chloe." I looked at the lavender plant. "That's a good choice. It does well here." I remembered you always liked the smell. She held the pot out, not as an offering for the house, but for the garden, a contribution. I thought maybe it could go here, with the others. I opened the gate and stepped aside to let her in. Maya says the herbs section is over by the eastern fence. Let's plant it there. We walked together across the freshly turned earth. The volunteers greeted her with friendly nods. Some knew her from childhood. She smiled back, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. We knelt side by side at the designated herb plot. I used a trowel to dig a hole. Chloe carefully tipped the lavender from its plastic container, loosening the root ball with gentle fingers. "David and I are separating," she said quietly, her eyes on her task. "He's moving out. He says he can't be with someone who allows what happened. I think he finally understands that I don't regret it, not anymore. I placed the plant into the hole. I'm sorry for your pain, but not for the outcome. I know. She began to push the soil back around the base of the plant, firming it with care. I've started seeing a therapist to figure out how I got so lost, how I let his voice become louder than my own, louder than yours. We finished planting the lavender. The gray-green leaves already released their clean, calming scent in the warmth of the sun. We stood up, looking at our work, then at the broader garden taking shape around us. "It's going to be beautiful," she said, her gaze taking in the organized chaos of the project. "It already is," I replied. "It's alive, it's growing, that's the point." She turned to me. "Can I come back, not just today, sometimes, to help, to remember how to do this?" I looked at my daughter. The polished veneer was gone. In its place was a woman who looked tired, sadder, but more real. The guilt and the grief had scraped away the pretense. What remained was unvarnished, and there was a strength in that vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "This is your home, Chloe," I said, repeating my words from that difficult night, but with a new meaning. "The door is open, and the garden will always need tending." She nodded, a tear escaping but quickly wiped away with a dusty hand. Not a tear of manipulation, but of release. "Thank you, Mom." We did not hug. The moment was too fragile, too new for that. But our hands brushed as we both reached to gather the empty pot and trowel. The contact was brief, a spark of connection. She stayed for another hour, helping to water the new plants. She spoke little, but she listened to Maya's instructions. She smiled at a neighbor's joke. She was simply present. When she left, she promised to return the following weekend. She did not say goodbye to the house as a lost asset. She waved to it, and to me, as a place she would see again. I returned to my spot near the oak tree. The afternoon sun was warm on my back, glinting off my silver hair. I looked at the lavender plant, already looking settled in its new home. I looked at the rich, dark soil, teeming with potential. I looked at my house, its windows open to the spring air, no longer a vault to be cracked but a heart beating steadily, its rhythm now shared with the community around it. The revenge was complete. It had not been fiery or cruel. It had been cold, legal, and structural. I had built a fortress of paper and principle that their greed could not scale. In doing so, I had not just protected bricks and mortar. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had transformed a target into a gift. And in the quiet, sunlit aftermath, with the smell of turned earth and lavender around me, I felt a profound peace. The house stood. The tree grew. The garden bloomed. And my daughter, perhaps, was finally coming home, not to claim, but to contribute. That was the truest victory of all. It was not about making them lose. It was about making something new grow from the broken ground. And it was growing, right before my eyes.